welcome or welcome back to another video. If you're new here, my name's Emma, and if you're not new here, it is finally time for my top 25 books I read in 2025. I did this last year with my top 24 books I read in 2024 and thought it would be perfect to do it again, kind of just as a way to wrap up the reading year and share what my top books were. In addition to sharing my top 25 books of the year, I'm also going to be sharing some fun stats and also answering some bookish related questions about my reading year at the end of the video. So without further ado, let's dive into it. My reading goal for the year was 75 books and I read 74, almost 75 books. I was just shy of hitting that reading goal. I actually think on the last day of the year, I was about 100 pages or a little under 100 pages away from finishing a book that would have been my 75th book. But I still feel really proud of myself for hitting 74 books. And in those 74 and a half books, I read 34,601 pages. That's according to Goodreads, so it could be a little bit off. Now let's jump into my list of top 25 books I read in 2025. We're gonna be working our way from 25th place to first place. I am not including any rereads on this list. I did have several rereads in 2025, but if I'm rereading a book, it's because I love it and I already know it's gonna be 5 stars, so it just doesn't seem fair to stick those on this list. And also I read a lot of series, so instead of placing each individual book from the series on the list or even combining their ratings for an average to place it on this list, I'm just taking the highest rated book out of a series and including it on the list, if that makes sense. At number 25, I'm honestly shocked that this book is making the list, and that is Baggage Claim by Juliana Smith. I read this in February, around the time that I was going on a ski trip with my husband and his family. This book is centered around a ski resort. It's a romance. I honestly think it might have been a holiday romance. I can't remember, but I picked it up simply because it was set at a ski resort and I thought that would be perfect and so atmospheric for our trip. And it was, and I did really enjoy it. But given that it was your typical contemporary romance, a little bit cheesy, a little bit feels like a Hallmark movie, I am surprised that it made it to the list. I did rate it 4 out of 5 stars, and I do think some of that rating comes from just the fact that I was surprised with how much I enjoyed it. At number 24, we have Addicted to You by Krista and Becca Ritchie. This is the first book in the Addicted/Calloway Sisters series. It was a goal of mine to get to that series, or at least start that series in 2025, and I did manage to read the first 2 or 3 books. I can't remember. Like I said, this was the first one. I wasn't really sure what to expect going into it because I often hear mixed reviews, but overall I feel like there's a lot of love for this series and I was excited to see what I thought for myself, and I ended up really enjoying it. It's definitely not something I'm obsessed with, but I liked it enough to continue the series, and I'm hoping to get to more books in that series this year. I also rated that one 4 stars. At number 23, we have Dust by Hugh Howey. This is the 3rd book in the Silo trilogy, and the only reason I read this trilogy is because one of my TBR jar prompts said to read a book that my dad recommends, and the books in this trilogy are some of my dad's favorite fiction books. He reads a lot of nonfiction, and I really did not want to read some nonfiction, so I picked up that trilogy just to fit the prompt and ended up really enjoying it. The 3rd book I would say is probably my favorite, and that's why it's making number 23 on the list. I rated it 4 stars. At number 22, also from a trilogy, we have Thunderhead by Neal Shusterman. This is the 2nd book in the Arc of Scythe trilogy. I think that's what it's called. I had this trilogy sitting on my shelves for years. It always ended up on my monthly TBR list and I somehow never got to it. I just kept putting it off. So I was determined to get to it in 2025, and thank goodness I did because I really enjoyed it. This series is YA dystopian, a little bit sci-fi, and I was pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed it. I also rated that 4 stars, if I didn't already say. At number 21, we have a recent read, and that is Good Spirits by B.K. Borison. This is a holiday contemporary romance, and I was shocked by how much I ate it up and by how much I'm still thinking about it after I finished reading it. If you guys would want to know more of what that book's about and what my thoughts on it were, I did recently post a video where I read 7 books in 7 days. This book is included on there, so I will link it up here somewhere if anyone's interested in going and checking that out. I rated this book 4 stars, and all I can say is I cannot wait to read more books by B.K. Borison. At number 20, we have Goldfinch by Raven Kennedy. This is the newest release and maybe the final release in the Plated Prisoner series by Raven Kennedy. I started that series in 2020, 2021 or 2022. I can't remember, but I flew through the first like 3 or 4 books, and ever since then I've been reading the books as they've come out. And for some reason I've been putting Goldfinch off. Like, it's been out for a while, but I finally got to it this year and it did not disappoint. I absolutely loved it, and I feel like that is a very underrated fantasy romance series. I don't hear it get talked about enough, and I loved the book. I also ended up convincing my mom to read that series this year. I did rate Goldfinch 4 out of 5 stars. At number 19, we have One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. I gave this book 4.25 out of 5 stars. This is a YA borderline NA fantasy romance, but it's gothic fantasy, which I haven't read much like that before, and I ate up every second of it. It was so atmospheric. Like, I can picture everything from that book so clearly in my head. I actually read both books in that duology, but enjoyed the first book a little bit more. At number 18, we have Alchemized by Sin Lin Yu. And going into 2025, if you would have told me I would be reading that book, I probably would have laughed in your face. If you guys don't know, Alchemized is basically a fanfic of Hermione. Like Hermione as in Draco and Hermione from Harry Potter. I am a huge Harry Potter fan, have been since I was 7 years old, and I've never dabbled in the world of Harry Potter fanfic. My main reason being that I just don't want to mess up my perception of the characters and the world as I currently know it. So the original fanfic Manacled, which was super popular on Wattpad back in the day and has continued to be popular, I had told myself I'm absolutely never reading that, even though I knew it was really popular. Then I heard that Manacled was getting rewritten, re-edited, reworked to be its own standalone fantasy book, which is the book Alchemized. And I remember when that announcement came out, I still kind of told myself I'm never gonna read that because I'm gonna still know that it's Draco and Hermione. But then I started seeing all this hype about how great it was, and I decided to just give it a try. I will say, if you're like me and you've been putting off that book because you don't want to be picturing the Harry Potter characters in that story, I think you'd be fine to read it and you won't experience that. I personally did not see too much resemblance. I obviously never read the original fanfic, so I don't know how much was changed from that to what is out now. But to me, Alchemized held its own. It felt like its own world, completely separate from Harry Potter. There was very minimal similarities to Harry Potter characters. Obviously, all names have been changed, but it has its own magic system and world building that is completely separate from Harry Potter, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, even though it was an extremely sad book and extremely frustrating book at some times. It absolutely wrecked me, and I really enjoyed reading it. I was honestly just surprised by how much I liked it, and I gave it 4.25 stars. At number 17, we have Throne of Secrets by Kerri Maniscalco. This is one of the books in the spin-off of the Kingdom of the Wicked trilogy. I have read the first 2 books in that spin-off, and Throne of the Secrets was my favorite of the 2. I rated it 4.5 out of 5 stars. This is an adult fantasy romance that's centered around the princes of hell, who all represent the 7 deadly sins. I believe all these spin-off books are going to be following one of each of the princes, and it's just so fun to be in that world. I love Kerri Maniscalco's writing, and I really enjoy her characters. At number 16, we have A Curse for True Love by Stephanie Garber. This is the 3rd and final book in the Once Upon a Broken Heart trilogy, which is a spin-off of the Caraval trilogy. I read Caraval way a long time ago, and for some reason had been putting off this trilogy, even though I always hear people saying that it's better than Caraval, and I finally got to that whole trilogy in 2025, and it did not disappoint. Stephanie Garber's writing is so whimsical and magical and fairy tale-esque and fun, but also high stakes and has elements of mystery, and it just has you on the edge of your seat the whole time you're reading it. Plus, the tension and slow burn in the romance is unmatched. Like I said, this 3rd and final book in the trilogy was my favorite, and I often hear people say the 2nd is their favorite and that they didn't really enjoy the final book. I'm not really sure why people think that though, because at least for me, the 3rd one was by far the best one. I rated it 4.5 out of 5 stars. At number 15, we have Life's Too Short by Abby Jimenez. This is a contemporary romance, and Abby Jimenez is one of my favorite romance authors, and honestly just favorite authors ever. This is actually one of her earlier books, and I think the reason I've been putting it off so long is because I didn't want to be completely done with Abby Jimenez books. I had read all her other ones. This was the only one sitting on my shelf unread, and I just was letting it sit there because I didn't want to be done with her books. I liked the idea of always having an option to pick up another Abby Jimenez book. if I wanted to, but I finally bit the bullet and read it, and I'm so glad that I did because it was wonderful. It was everything I experience every time I read an Abby Jimenez book. It's fun and lighthearted and rom-commy, but at the same time there's emotional depth and the characters feel so realistic and relatable. I knew I was gonna love that book before I even read the first page. I rated it 4.5 out of 5 stars. At number 14, we have Heartless Hunter by Kristen Ciccarelli. This is the first book in a fantasy romance duology. I would consider it to be YA, borderline NA, but the best part about it is that it has a Bridgerton-esque feel to it, but it's about a witch and a witch hunter. And that's all I'm gonna say. If that sounds even a little bit good to you, I urge you to pick that book up and read it. I ate it up. I was obsessed with both of those books, but the first one is definitely my favorite. I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. At number 13, we have The Conditions of Will by Jessa Hastings. This is a standalone contemporary romance by the author of the Magnolia Parks universe, which if you guys know anything about me, I love that series with my whole heart, and I was super excited that she was coming out with another book, so I picked it up and read it, obviously, and honestly, it exceeded expectations. I feel like because I love Magnolia Parks so much, I set my expectations a little bit lower for The Conditions of Will, because in my head I was just like, there's no way that this is gonna live up to Magnolia Parks, there's no way I'm gonna love these characters as much, it's just a standalone. I was wrong. It was absolutely phenomenal, beautifully written. Jessa Hastings has such a talent for beautiful and lyrical writing that is also so raw and relatable, and she delivered with this book. I loved every single second of it. She also does a really good job of making unlikable characters likable. I don't know if that makes any sense, but if you've read her books, that probably makes sense to you. I rated it 4.5 out of 5 stars. At number 12, we have Quicksilver by Callie Hart. I rated this one 4.5 out of 5 stars. This is an adult fantasy romance that was super hyped up on TikTok, and honestly, that's the reason I wanted to read it, because I've been seeing so much hype, and it lived up to the hype. I loved it, and I ate up every single second of it. I've seen some people complaining that it's very like cookie cutter standard fantasy romance, that it's too trope heavy. I don't care. Give me all the tropes. I eat that stuff up. I loved it. I have zero complaints. I actually recently finished Brimstone, the second book in that series. That's actually the book that I almost finished before the year ended, and I did rate it higher than Quicksilver. So I guess I could replace Brimstone with Quicksilver on this list, but I feel like that's cheating, and I need to include Brimstone as the first book I finished in 2026. But I love everything that's happening in that series so far, and I can't wait for more books to come out. At number 11, we have The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. This is a historical fiction. It's the first book I've read by Kristen Hanna, and I'm so glad that I did read it because now I want to read everything she's ever written. This book follows two sisters in France during World War II. Their journeys look very different, but both are equally beautiful and impactful and gut-wrenching and heartbreaking, and that's all I'm gonna say about it. I cried. I loved this book. It was beautifully written. I still think about it to this day. I recommend it to pretty much everyone I know. I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Honestly, I feel like I could bump up that rating, but I'm just gonna leave it at that for now. At number 10, we have The Blood Trader by Lynette Noni. This is the third and final book in the Prison Healer trilogy. This is another trilogy that I have owned for quite a while, and I think I was just hesitant to get into it because I've heard so many mixed reviews. I feel like very polar opposite reviews, honestly. Some people love it. They say the plot twists are amazing, the characters are amazing, the romance is amazing, and then other people say it's boring and it's slow. And I struggle with boring and slow when it comes to fantasy, so I think maybe that's why I was hesitant to go into it, but I did get into it, obviously, in 2025. I loved every single book in this trilogy, but that third and final one really did it for me. I was so hooked, so invested. I found myself thinking about the characters like while I was in the shower, while I was cooking dinner. I just was so fully immersed in that world. It's a YA fantasy with a sprinkle of romance. I wouldn't really call romance the main plot, but it's a pretty significant plot, especially as the books go on. It has an amazing found family trope, and also just the world building and magic system of this world is very intriguing and very different from other fantasies that I've read. I would highly recommend that whole trilogy, but The Blood Trader in particular, I gave 4.5 stars. At number 9, we have The Winners by Fredrik Backman. This is the third and final book in the Beartown trilogy, and that whole trilogy absolutely wrecked me. I have no words. It's also really hard to explain what that trilogy is about, because if I explain it, it's gonna sound boring, but I'm gonna try my best. The Beartown trilogy is about a small, secluded mountain town in, I wanna say Sweden, where ice hockey is the center of everyone's world. We are following the perspective of, I don't even know how many characters, there's so many POVs in this book, and you're kind of just going about their daily lives, except that there's really tragic things happening in their daily lives. You know, I'm actually gonna stop trying to explain it. I feel like I'm making it sound like not interesting at all, but I loved it. I loved every single second of it. I went into it kind of blind. I had seen people raving about it, but I didn't really know much of it other than it's about a small town with ice hockey. And that trilogy has made me want to read everything that Fredrik Backman has ever written. That last book, The Winners in particular, I mean, it lives rent-free in my brain. I gave that 4.75 stars. At number 8, we have Say You'll Remember Me by Abby Jimenez. I know I just talked about Abby Jimenez and how much I love her, and that still stands true. This was her newest release. I was completely obsessed with it. I gave it 4.75 out of 5 stars. I don't know that it's my favorite Abby Jimenez book, but it's up there fighting for like 2nd or 3rd place. Genuinely, I love all of her books, but this one especially was so wonderful. At number 7 on the list, we have a surprising 5-star read and our first 5-star read on the list, and that is The Passion Project by London Sperry. This is a contemporary romance. It was a Book of the Month box pick. I had never read anything by this author before, hadn't really seen any reviews for this book, and picked it up on a whim this summer, I think, because I was wanting like a fun summery romance book, and wow, this book completely blew me away. It is a contemporary romance, but similar to some of my other favorite romance authors like Abby Jimenez and Emily Henry, it had so much emotional depth to it, and the characters felt like real people that could exist out there in the world. This book made me cry, it made me laugh, and it made me feel every emotion in between. I feel like this book deserves so much more hype. I loved it, and I still think about it to this day. I obviously gave it 5 stars for a reason. At number 6, we have Fearless by Lauren Roberts. This is the 3rd and final book in the Powerless trilogy. It's YA fantasy romance with the best tension and banter ever. It has every trope a fantasy romance reader could ever want. I have been reading those books ever since the first one came out, and I absolutely love them. So this book was obviously a very highly anticipated read for me in 2025, and it lived up to all my expectations. I honestly would say it might be my favorite one out of the entire trilogy. Even though it's been a while since I've read those other 2, I feel like I can confidently say that this one was my favorite. I gave it 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. Like I said, it's everything a fantasy romance reader could want shoved into one book. At number 5, we have Powerless by Elsie Silver. This is, I believe, the 3rd or 4th book in the Chestnut Springs series. I read that entire series this year and loved all of it. It's contemporary cowboy romance. I'm obsessed with all the characters. The found family trope is amazing, but this book in particular just was my favorite. Some of it may be that the main character is a dancer, so I kind of relate to that because I grew up dancing, but I don't know, just something about this story hit a little bit harder than all the other ones. I gave it 5 stars, and it's making number 5 on the list, even though I loved every single book in the Chestnut Springs series. At number 4, we have The Women by Kristen Hanna. This was the 2nd Kristen Hanna book I read this year. I think it might have been a Book of the Month book for me. I'm not really sure, but I had read The Nightingale and loved it and decided I wanted to read more Kristen Hanna. I was honestly though convinced that nothing would be better than The Nightingale, but this one was. I gave it 5 stars. This one is also a historical fiction that is set before, during, and after the Vietnam War. It follows several characters, but our main character is Frankie, who is a Vietnam War nurse, and kind of just what her journey looks like going to war, experiencing it, and then kind of just like what life is like after that. I was sobbing. I was thinking about this book constantly when I wasn't reading it. I was waiting to be able to get back to the book to read it. I loved it so much. At number 3, we have Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros, the most recent release in the Empyrean series. I am obsessed with this series. It's fantasy romance. There's a reason that everyone is obsessed with it. There's a reason it's getting turned into a show. There's a reason why it's one of the most talked about books and book series on the internet, and that's all I'm gonna say. It was obviously 5 stars. I read it and then I reread it immediately after. At number 2, we have Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. This is the newest book in the world of the Hunger Games, although it is a prequel to the Hunger Games, and it follows Haymitch's story. I feel like I can't even talk about this book because I'm still at a loss for words, and I read it back in March, but it was beautiful. Again, I just feel it really don't have words. It was so good, and I cried so much. If you know, you know. If you don't know, you're missing out. That's all I'm gonna say. 5 stars if I didn't say it already. And at number 1, my favorite book of the entire year, and from a series that was my favorite series of the year last year. If you haven't guessed it already, it's Releasing 10 by Chloe Walsh, the most recent release in the Boys of Tommen series. Boys of Tommen is one of my favorite series of all time. I'm obsessed with the stories and the characters, and I feel like I know them personally, and this book was the exact same, except honestly it hit me 10 times harder. It's extremely sad. If you're gonna read it, please, please, please look up trigger warnings. There's been a lot of controversy this year over this book and people being upset about the contents of the book, but I think my opinion is just that it's not meant to be a cute, fun, lighthearted romance. It is meant to reflect real things that real people go through. It's just being told by pages on a book. I don't have anything else to say about it. I'm obsessed. It destroyed me, but it was so beautiful. It was so raw, so real. Chloe Walsh, I absolutely love you and adore you, and I will read books in the world of Boys of Tommen until the day I die. Now I'm gonna rapid fire some questions about my reading year as a whole. I think it's really fun to do this. I did these same questions at the end of last year's video, and it just helps me reflect on my reading year, so let's dive into it. The first question is, what is the most disappointing book I read this year? And I would like to say I never get really disappointed by books because I try to have an optimistic outlook on everything I read, even if it's not something I really enjoy. There's always some type of takeaway from it, but that being said, I would have to say the most disappointing book I read was Watch Me by Tara Mafi. This is a spin-off book of the Shatter Me series, and I am so obsessed with the Shatter Me series. I first read it in like middle school or high school and then reread it in college, so I was really excited, obviously, that a new book was coming out, but it wasn't exactly what I was hoping it would be. That's not to say it was a bad book. I just didn't feel the same way about it as I do about the other Shatter Me books, if that makes sense. Question number 2 is a book I read that I thought was overhyped, and I'm gonna have to say Spark of the Everflame by Penn Cole. I heard this getting talked about all over the internet. It's fantasy romance, and I'm always looking for a new fantasy romance that is gonna make me feel the same way that my other favorite fantasy romances do. This one to me just fell short. It wasn't bad by any means, I just never really got hooked or invested, and I found myself zoning out a lot and just honestly not really caring about the characters or the plot. But I know a lot of people really love that series. I think my mom read all of them and really enjoyed them. I see so many other creators talking about how much they enjoyed it. I just don't think it was for me. For whatever reason, I'm not going to be continuing that series, and I really couldn't tell you a single thing about it. Like, I don't think I even remember the main character's name. So for that reason, I would say that's probably the most overhyped book I read. The next question is my favorite book couple from the year, and there's absolutely no way that I can name just one, so I'm going to quickly list off my top favorites. Potential spoiler warning, I'm not really sure, but if you're worried about that, you can skip a little bit ahead in the video. I'm gonna go through these very quickly. We have Violet and Xaden from Onyx Storm, Jax and Evangeline from the Once Upon a Broken Heart trilogy, all of the couples in the Chestnut Springs series, Samantha and Xavier from Say You'll Remember Me by Abby Jimenez, Peyton and Kai from Fearless, Rune and Gideon from Heartless Hunter, Kiva and Jaren from the Prison Healer trilogy, Lizzie and Huey from Releasing 10. That might be the number 1 out of all of these. Georgia and Sam from The Conditions of Will, Bennett and Henry from The Passion Project, Saris and Kingfisher from Quicksilver, and Harriet and Nolan from Good Spirits. Moving on, the next question is my favorite main character of the year. Once again, I cannot pick just one, but these are the ones that live in my mind the most frequently. We have all of the women from the Chestnut Springs series, but particularly Sloane, Peyton from Fearless or the Powerless trilogy, Lizzie from Releasing 10, Frankie from The Women, Ceres from Quicksilver, and Citra from the Scythe trilogy. Question number 5 is the happiest book of the year. And this was hard because I feel like I read a lot of sad books this year, but if I had to pick, I would say the Chestnut Spring series as a whole. Even though there are serious things that happen and sad things that happen in them, the main feeling I take away from reading those is happy and giddy and giggly and lighthearted and warm, fuzzy, cozy, feely romance. It's cowboy romance. How could you not feel happy about that, is basically what I'm saying. And then also any of the holiday romance books I read this year, I feel like those were all really cute and sweet and fun. Question number 6 is the flip of that, the saddest book I read of the year. Like I said, I read a lot of sad books, but by far these have to be the saddest. Sunrise on the Reaping, if you know, you know. The Women by Kristen Hanna and The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. Those ripped my heart out. The Beartown trilogy by Frederick Bachman. Alchemized by Sin-Lin Yu. And Releasing 10. I cried so much in that book. What does that say about me that my favorite book of the year is also the saddest book I read this year? Question number 7 is the most frustrating book I read this year, and that's gonna have to go to Jade City by Fonda Lee. This was a book I challenged myself to read, and going into it, I knew that it was gonna be complicated world building, complex politics, complex magic system, and even though I knew that, it still was a very, very challenging read. So because I had to use so much brain power to understand what was happening in it, I guess I would consider it to be the most frustrating book I read. And then lastly, question number 8 is my favorite book cover from the year, and I have a tie. The first one is Say You'll Remember Me by Abby Jimenez. I just love all the bright colors. I love that all of Abby Jimenez's books have a dog featured somewhere on the front or the back of the cover, and I don't know, it's just so cute and it's so pretty and I love it so much. And then the other one is gonna go to The Conditions of Will by Jessa Hastings. All of her cover art is stunning, but I particularly love the art on this one. And that is it for the questions. That is it for my favorite books of the year. Comment below and let me know if you read any of these books and what you thought of them, and also comment below what your #1 book of the year was, because I'm very interested to know, and maybe I'll find some new recommendations for myself. As always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this in the future. I will also have my Instagram, TikTok, and Goodreads linked in the description below if you guys would be interested in following me over on those platforms and checking out my other content, or you can always head over to this channel and see the videos I have posted currently. 2025 was such a great reading year, and I cannot wait to see what 2026 has in store. Thank you guys so much for watching, and that's all for now. Bye, guys.